It is a difficult passage, isn't it? It's edgy. Honestly, I'd rather just skip it today. It's not what we expect from Jesus. We don't like that way of hearing Jesus speak. We hear that not peace but a sword, and pardon my pun, it's edgy, too edgy for comfort. But it is part of the story. Jesus has been healing and reconciling. Jesus has been forgiving and connecting. Jesus has been doing the work of the kingdom of God. And now there is some pushback. There is some pressures that are coming towards him. And part of it, for those of us who've been walking with Jesus in these Lucan chapters, is also what the narrative is trying to do for us. See, this whole chapter has had this dimension of what happens at the end of time. In the end of time, there is a cataclysmic encounter that pits sides against one another, the reality of what happens in the midst of life. Division, disagreement. The question becomes, why? Why is this happening in this moment? Why is Jesus speaking like this? And what are we to do with this kind of passage? Well, let's think about human nature just for a second together. And we know that humans gather together and gather with like-minded people around us. We know that that's part of what it means to be human community, but we also know how quickly we can turn against another. And some of that turning against another is part of what surprises us here. That kind of honest assessment that Jesus gives us in this passage is part of what throws us off a little bit for us. Because in our minds, we say, well, wait a minute, why is this happening? Jesus has been doing amazing things, hasn't he? He's been healing and restoring and forgiving. He's been doing all these amazing things. You could imagine if this was going on in our neighborhood, right? If our neighborhood was seeing more flourishing, if people were hearing good news and responding like that, if sick people were being healed around us and bound people were being liberated around us and people that were in the margins were being restored and people's lives were being renewed around us, we would celebrate, right? Wouldn't we celebrate? And yet, we know that that's not always the case. That in fact, we can get so hyper-focused on the way things have always been that when we see this newness bubble up around us, something throws us off. When we see this newness bubble up around us, we begin to question certain things, and especially for those in Jesus' time and those in our time who are people in power, who are people who are leaders, who are people who have certain agency, right? These folks who were in these kind of positions found themselves at a loss, and they were attacking Jesus left and right. They didn't like what Jesus was doing because Jesus was awakening the community around him in such powerful ways that they became afraid that they were going to lose their privilege, their position, their control, the way that they have always done things. And so they begin to attack Jesus. And it is that reality that Jesus speaks to us about today. We know that so often in our radical love that we have, that we practice in the world, when we love in these ways that restore and renew and heal and reconcile, when we begin to question the way things have always been, when we begin to be participants in new ways of reconciliation and forgiveness and love and compassion and justice and peace, when we do that, what happens is that it does create a struggle. It does indeed create division. We see it, we feel it, we experience it around us. It's just the reality of what it means to be human community. And so Jesus is speaking to his disciples 2,000 years ago and really speaking to us today, because it would be so easy for us when we sense that pushback, when we sense that division, it would be so easy for us to just go back to the way things have always been. out of fear, out of uncomfortableness. So Jesus is warning his disciples 2,000 years ago, and he's warning us today that radical love, the love we are trying to practice as followers of Jesus, even right here at First-Plymouth, is indeed going to be controversial at times. It's going to cause division at times. For me, for us, the question then becomes, in light of that reality, what do we do? How do we respond in light of that reality? And that internal sense is that we will respond in kind, right? Oh, you hit me, I hit you back. You don't like me, I don't like you back. You dehumanize me, I dehumanize you back. But here's the kicker, right? That doesn't work. See, that doesn't work. That yes, I don't bring peace but a sword. It's a reality. In other words, there's going to be this division created among us. But the real challenge is, in light of that division, are we going to double down on love, or are we going to abandon it? Are we going to double down on compassion, or are we going to abandon it? Are we going to double down on peacemaking and reconciliation and forgiveness and kinship and community, or are we going to abandon it? And we must be reminded, people of God, on this day that we must not abandon it. That in fact, we should double down on it and keep on coming together to remind one another how important it is that we practice it, and practice it with abandon. Loving more, reconciling more, forgiving more, finding new ways to build community and kinship all around us. And when the struggles come, and when the division comes, and when the naysayers come, and when the powerful and the leaders begin to feel threatened and fear resides in them, and they try to stop us from the work, we come together and keep at the work. That's the response of us as faithful followers of Jesus. And we have one another, surrounding one another with care to remind each other of how important this work is. So people of God, do not be afraid of the radical love we've been called to. Do not be afraid. It's edgy. It's edgy because it changes everything. And in the midst of division and strife, may we continue to do the work in spite of it and model a new way. And in that modeling, in that being, in that doubling down on love and compassion and justice and peace and reconciliation and forgiveness and shalom, in that doubling down, we then spread seeds further. The kingdom of God visiting. We seeing Jesus in our communities as we just hard-headedly choose love, even in the midst of strife. Let's go. Let's do it, even when it's hard. Amen.